the Teach Pitch podcast. We are very excited to be launching a series of interviews for Teach Pitch, a global community of tens of thousands of subscribers from over 205 countries who all have a desire to improve the state of education in this world. And for these interviews, we have selected a number of our subscribers who have achieved great things. And by great, I mean amazing. Think of former presidents, entrepreneurs, fashion designers, hospital builders, non-profit founders, authors, journalists, doctors, etc. And what all our guests have in common is that despite their great success, they've encountered many enormous challenges. So what were these challenges and how did they overcome them? That is what we are going to be talking about here. My name is Aldo de Pap and I'm massively looking forward and very grateful you can join us on this journey. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here.
Because I think in innovation, that's very common. I mean, the number of times I've heard, how would that really work? Are you really willing to risk a child's future? And, the reality is, of course, I'm not. Of course, I will never do that. The reality is, we're not risking a child's future as long as I know that I'm not doing harm. But if it is a program that I'm comfortable will at worst do nothing and at best have great impact, why would I not try it?
A very warm welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of the Teach Pitch podcast. I hope you are doing well, that you're having a beautiful summer and that you were able to rest up a bit and re-energize a little more. Before I dive into the next episode, I just wanted to ask you whether you noticed our new intro music. What do you think? I absolutely love it. It's very majestic, isn't it? This is what our producer Natalie said, and I tend to agree. I love that word, majestic. Now, if you have any comments or ideas, if you like it or maybe the opposite, absolutely hate it, then please let us know what you think. You can get in touch with us via social media, all the Instagram handles on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn shouldn't be too hard to find, or otherwise ping us a quick email at info@teachpitch.com. Now, it is Thursday, which means we are here with another interview, and this conversation is taking us back to our educational roots. And this time, we're very happy to connect you with the Education Above All Foundation, a massive organization that is on the forefront of improving the global state of teaching and learning in our world through a variety of massive programs. And more specifically, we're going to talk to its amazing innovation director, Janhvi Maheshwari-Kanoria. Janhvi is a guiding light and a force of nature with the work that she does at Education Above All. And I highly enjoyed speaking to her about all the programs of the foundations, the many teachers that Education Above All trained, the funding they provided, the scholarships they granted, and all the other work that is so relevant to make sure that every one of us will be granted the right to a high quality education. So without further ado, let's dive into the world of global education with an absolutely awesome innovation director, Janhvi Maheshwari-Kanoria.
This podcast is brought to you by Smartest, an app that uses artificial intelligence to let you create interactive quizzes for your class in a few seconds. Get started for free on app.smartest.io.
A very warm welcome to everyone. Very happy you could make it for another episode of the Teach Pitch podcast. And this one is a special one because it brings us back closer to our education route. And not only education, also innovation in education, which is relevant to keep the process of teaching and learning going on a global scale. And I have the great honor of sitting here with Janhvi Kanoria, who is Director of Innovation at Education Above All. Janhvi, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Aldo. It's so lovely to be here. We've known each other for so long, so it's just lovely to collaborate like this on this platform. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast, so it's also great to be a part of it and be featured in it.
Yes, and it's a great pleasure to have you. And you're right, Janvi. We've had the opportunity to meet several times at activities and conferences around the World Innovation Summit for Education in Madrid and in Doha. And it's always so great to see you. And we always talk to each other, but we always discover there's never enough time because these events are always packed with so many activities and talks and whatever more. And I thought that this medium would be good to really highlight the important work that you do for education above all. So, yeah, education above all, I want to know more about it. So, before we go into your challenges, could you, for the listeners, briefly tell us what it is that the organization does, and then talk also a little bit about your role within the organization?
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity. So, Education Above All is a global foundation which is headquartered in Qatar. We work towards SDG 4, so we work towards quality access to education for the world's most marginalized children, youth around the world. And we do this in very different ways. So, our flagship program, Educate a Child, focuses on primary, out of school, and at risk children, helps them re engage and relearn in schools. We also have programs like Peace, which work with legal advocacy for rights of children in emergencies and conflicts. We have a program called ROTA, which supports global citizenship education. And then we have Fakura, which helps at scholarships at the higher education level. And we work with almost 10 million plus children in 50 different countries around the world. And the reason that the innovations team that I lead exists is because we realize that with all our work and all of the commitments around the world, the problems facing the most marginalized children with respect to education are just growing way faster and are getting much more complicated than the solutions. And so the idea was to start an innovations team within EAA to really identify some of these very persistent challenges facing these children, design and develop new solutions for them, and then pilot and test these out to see what works and what doesn't. So, our role is not only just to identify them for persisting challenges, but also to identify what we can do in cases of emergencies. And as you know, for the last 3 years, because of COVID and then the Afghan crisis and then the Ukraine crisis, we're just in emergency after emergency, trying to understand how we can make sure that learning is not lost, children are supported, and we, as much as possible, are trying to be reactive and responsive to their needs. So it's a really fun job. It's really my dream role.
Yeah, it sounds well. I'm happy you say fun, but also very important to do. Could you mention an example of an innovation or kind of something that you found that you amplified through your programs?
Absolutely. So let me tell you about an innovation that we actually designed and developed ourselves. When COVID 19 started, we didn't know how long it would last, but there was one thing that we knew for sure, that most of the children who we work with around the world did not have access to technology. They don't have access to laptops, tablets, internet, but they also often do not have access to TVs, radios, and even feature phones. So the question was, how do we reach these learners who don't have this access? But the second part of the question was, they also don't have access to resources at home. So they don't have books or textbooks at home very often. They don't have educational materials. And what's even more daunting is the fact that their parents or caretakers are often not very literate, or they themselves are engaged in making a living and they can't really become teachers to their children overnight. So we understood this context, and we were also acutely aware that if these children do not have any opportunities to learn and the COVID 19 pandemic continues for a protracted period of time, we will lose these children from the education system. And we worked really hard to make sure that they get reintegrated. So, the idea was quite basic. We thought about just the fact that children actually do learn all the time and from everything around them. So, how do we create learning experiences which are inspired from their everyday life? So, how do we ensure that when they're cooking a meal, They're learning about numeracy, they're learning recipes, they're learning measurements, they're learning prices of ingredients, they're making and getting a sense of how to write step by step the process of making that particular dish. So we created that into project-based learning example, which was around creating your own pop-up restaurant at home. So
Wow.
children put together a meal for their family, but in doing so, they created a business plan around how the restaurant would work. They did surveys around preferences. They did pricing plans when they thought about cost of ingredients. They did all of this. So there was a lot of literacy and numeracy that happened in what is a very simple thing that every child does at home.
Mhm.
Some of the other kind of resources we developed were around play. So, how do you convert play and games into making them more engaging and also focused on learning? So, for example, children, of course, love to jump. So, how do you create a simple game using a dice and a number line, which is chalked out on a mud floor? And children can jump and play and therefore just really solidify their concept of addition, subtraction, multiplication. So we've created almost 400 such learning experiences, which are very simple, do not require technology, do not require resources, do not require a lot of parental support and supervision. And these have now been implemented with over 600,000 children around the globe. And we have done focused pilots in 11 plus countries. And what's really nice also about this is that it's actually been used in different ways. So it's, of course, been used where there was COVID and learning was disrupted, but it's also been used as alternative learning for those who never had access to education. So, for
Yeah.
example, children in Yemen or Sudan and so on. And in
Yeah.
other places, it's been used to enhance the quality of learning as well as the relevance of learning in schools. Because sometimes learning in schools is quite disconnected to the kind of learning and the experiences children have at home.
Yeah.
So this is called the Internet Free Education Resource Bank, which is a mouthful, and it's also called IFERB. And this is what we've been working on for the last 3 years, and we've now expanded that to include specific resources, same principles of technology-free, low resource requiring, and engaging, but focused on the Ukrainian refugee children and the Afghan refugee children based on their specific needs. So, for example, for the Afghan children, we focused on survival English because we felt like that was a huge gap in their current learning, which they would need if they were going to be repatriated around the world. For the Ukrainian children, we focus a lot on learning together, so ways for them and the host communities to integrate and work together in a fun and joyful manner so
Yeah.
that their current experience in host country is a little bit more easy and smooth.
Mhm.
So this whole bank exists online. People can just go and access it. But it's been a wonderful journey to develop this and really, really see how it's worked in different parts of the world over the last few years.
I can imagine, and we will be sure to include all relevant links to this resource bank in our show notes, so everyone can go to it and hopefully benefit from it as well. One question I have is with regards to applying it, because it's one thing, of course, to come up with the format, but then you said
Yeah.
600,000 children are
Yeah.
currently benefiting from it. How do you put it into practice? How do you guarantee uptake? How does that process work?
So, there's no guarantee for uptake. When we started developing it, it was on instinct. We just felt like if we put something out like this, let's just see how it goes. We started with just putting out project based learning resources, a few of them, that too. And then NGOs and school groups around the world, we just try to make sure that we reach them and let them know that this is something we are doing, it exists, it's cost free, it's open access. And people just started coming to us and they said, hey, can you help us implement this? So we actually then developed training materials around how to do this. Because one of the other unfortunate misconceptions is that project based learning is often seen as a very elite pedagogical tool. So in low resource communities, it cannot be used. And that's not true. That's not true at all. So, for us, a large part of the work was to actually build that confidence and capabilities within NGOs and school groups on the ground and say, this can be done. And for me, it's actually been really rewarding to see that of all the NGOs and school groups who've used this in a pilot with us, almost 75% of them have continued using the same pedagogical techniques and resources even after we finish the pilot. And that just goes to say that we've been able to sustain a change and transformation in how this is being done. But I should also tell you that, I say 600,000, but I don't know what the exact number is. It could be well higher because these are the numbers who we have directly worked with, who we have reports on, who have downloaded the materials from us. But we know that this has been featured on multiple websites and platforms. And almost every other day, we talk to a partner who would tell us that we've seen your resources or XYZ is using it. And that's the beauty of having something which is open source and cost free. So these are just the children we know that we have touched and impacted. It could be well more than that. And it's been a big learning journey also for us to know what has worked and what has not worked. And through the course of this, we've done a lot of work directly with NGOs to customize the offering based on our learnings of working with them. Because, for example, one of the NGOs in the early days sort of talked to us about how while the levels that we had created was appropriate for curricular standards, they were not appropriate for the fact that most learners are actually behind. And so what do we do about that? So, that was then built into the design and the product was customized. Some of the NGOs actually suggested topics for us to develop resources on. So some of them said, hey, floods are an issue for us. Can you develop something on floods? And we said, yeah, sure, absolutely. So a lot of it was done in tandem with them because of the way that the timeline also worked. We had partners engage with us within a month of us developing a few resources. So following the first month, almost everything was done in tandem with implementing partners based on their requirements and needs.
It's fascinating to hear that the uptake is almost automatic. And that also speaks to the high need at this moment, right? There is so much need for these resources. This is also one of the reasons that we started TeachPitch, because we saw the need, for people to have a bit of guidance when it comes to working with resources, to better understand them, to do a bit of hand holding, to do some interpretation, to make new resources. And just time and time again, you see just making it available already does so much. Whereas I think in any other sector, you would deal with, okay, yes, you have the resources, but then you still need to make sure that people actually do something with it. That's not, you cannot automatically assume that it works. But I think with education, it does, because there are unfortunately loads of areas, countries, regions whereby people are deprived of that, and I think what you are doing and what you were saying, it's crucial, and but I'm also so happy to hear that the uptake is so tremendous and that so many people benefit from it. Do you also collaborate in your approach with other non-governmental organizations or non-profit organizations who help you with the implementation?
So typically not. We usually work with INGOs, foundations, and schools. We also work with government, but usually through implementing partners and NGOs and schools.
Okay.
But Adu, one of the things I wanted to mention about what you were just saying about uptake, I made it sound very smooth. It's not been that smooth. I think one of the things to mention is, and I think we'll get into this more when we talk about challenges, but it is often hard to crack that circuit, which is also developed in the education space around NGOs and foundations and UN bodies and so on. There are so many small NGOs and school groups that have benefited so much from our resources, and it's really been a privilege to be
Yeah.
working with them because they're the ones who work directly with the most marginalized and the hardest to reach.
Yeah.
However, in finding them, it's been hard because we typically know and talk to the larger NGOs, the larger bodies. And while they also do phenomenal work, we often don't reach the people who just really, really need this. So we've now managed to reach, large numbers of them who just sort of lean on us to say, look, we know what we do, which is working with the children. But when it comes to developing curriculum or resources, it's just so much easier for us if someone does that and gives it to us. We don't have the capability and capacity to do both. So, that's where I think the real value out of this has been. where we've been working with people who just are doing unbelievable work when it comes to the teacher student interactions, when it comes to
Yeah.
mobilizing communities, but didn't have this piece sorted out. And so we've
Yeah.
just almost fit in like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. There's still loads of work to be done, right? That's of course you're never ready, kind of here. Yeah, you need to continuously look for more groups of people who are currently missing out, and that takes its time. And I can imagine that if you work at a scale that education above all is working, which is very big, it's on one hand very beneficial because yes, you can create an impact, but I can also imagine that it's difficult to get nitty gritty and to kind of get for those individuals who need it most, to identify them and to make sure they benefit from what you put out there. And that that's never an easy task. Before we dive into your challenges, I had a little question around the origins of education above all. So it is founded in Qatar and it is initiated also by the royal family of Qatar. How did it come together?
So, Her Highness Sheikha Mirza is our founder. She's also the founder of Qatar Foundation, which of
Mm,
course hosts WISE. And she is a real champion for education. So, when
mm,
she was appointed as an SDG4 ambassador, she put education above all together. But a
mm,
lot of our programs actually predate the organization. So, she and the royal family have been championing and working on education programs even prior to the foundation being set up.
mm,
And so our Educate a Child project or our Rota project, they existed in different forms even before and
before.
worked and did this similar kind of work around the world. And then there was this idea of putting it under one umbrella, which, has all these different offerings and can together, create much bigger impact around the globe.
Thank you for clarifying that. And yes, I can vouch for Sheikha Moza being an absolute force in getting education on the map on a global scale. I always highly enjoy her talks at the summits in Doha of the World Innovation Summit for Education. And then, it's such a tremendous honor and pleasure to then listen and to kind of see all the work that has been done over the past year. And also, looking at not only what has been done and awarding and rewarding those who've made a difference, but also looking ahead or where there's still work to be done. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
there always is, right? So,
Yeah.
it's with education, you're never done. Which is a nice bridge to your personal challenges,
Mhm.
Janhvi, and I'm very
Yeah.
happy you also took the opportunity to write them down, because your first challenge is a little bit about your journey and your career path in education, and as your first challenge, you describe kind of finding the balance in that, specifically when you see that education, it's not an easy field, it's not a very lucrative or easy profession you write, and most of us working in the field are here because we truly care. You say it is easy for work to become your personal mission and get over invested emotionally and then disappointed and heartbroken, or alternatively think of it as a job and be jaded and cynical. So, and I think that's beautiful. And I struggle with it. When you wrote this down and when I read this, I said, this is so true. Because, also with Teach Pitch, it started in 2014. I'm very proud of where we are today and kind of the things we've achieved, but it hasn't been easy. And yes, more than once, I basically was kind of confronted with, okay, the idealism and the social impact a lot more than the profitable questions, or kind of where there is money to be made or whatever. At some point, that is not relevant. It's relevant to sustain, of course, but it is almost not relevant to have that impact. So it was really good to see a little bit of a resonance there. But yeah, if you could just before we describe this challenge, I just want people to understand well kind of your academic path and then how you ended up with the organization. Can you very quickly take us through that?
Sure. So, Education was an accident for me. I was one of those children who loved education. So I loved being in school. I thrived in school. It was, I was one of those star students. But I think my biggest realization of wanting to work in education was after I graduated and I started working in a school, a low income school. And it was a volunteer position. And I was teaching a few 12th graders in the school. And I just recognized how different the experience could be for different people and how little that education was preparing those children compared to what my education did for me. So a lot of those children didn't have core critical thinking skills or empathy skills. And when I mean that, I don't mean that in a broad generalization. I'll give you an example. There were at that time lots of instances of boys molesting girls or doing sort of inappropriate things with girls on the streets in India. And I was sort of bringing this up to my class, and you know overall the class was sort of like, no, we don't get involved, we don't do anything about it. Now I understand why that is a good thing to say from a perspective of being preservation of your own goodwill and so on, but it was just such a hard thing to hear. So I was like, what if it's a classmate of yours who something happened to her, and wouldn't you intervene? And they were like, no, no, it's not safe to. Again, I understand that. But, if our youth thinks like this, just imagine what our future would be like. So, that's how I sort of got into education. And there were just lots of experiences in the school that promoted me to say, let me study this, let me do this right, and let me just understand what to be done. And I was always interested in innovation. I was always interested in saying, how do we solve these different things that are coming up? Lack of empathy, lack of engagement, low self esteem, just low literacy or numeracy skills, and so on. And that led me to do a master's, but then I focused a lot on teaching initially, which is, I still believe, my strongest foundation in education. And I go back to that experience all the time. And then I moved from there to working in the Ministry of Education in Qatar, where I was developing policy and also doing programming at the national level. It was fascinating to see how ministries work and what their challenges were, but also just how important their role is. And then I moved from there to Qatar Foundation, where I was working a lot more in the higher education portfolio, so with a lot of the branch campus universities that we host here. But alongside that, I was also thinking a little bit about the future of education in designing a futuristic school. And then finally, I moved to Education Above All a few years ago in the role that you currently see me as. But it's been a long and very varied journey, but it's always been one which I think at every step has opened my eyes to something completely new, and I think that's been really rewarding for me. And then speaking about the centering and the balance question that you asked, I mean, I wanted to just share a story, right, from where it started for me. When I was a teacher, I remember there was a 13-year-old student in my class who stole something from my class. And I saw that on the camera. And I thought I would handle this really well. So I really planned how I would handle this. And I spoke to this child separately. I told him, and I gave him the confidence that, I would keep this between us, but I wanted him to come clean to me. I talked to him about, working with me on this particular challenge. I sort of thought I managed it very well. And all I asked of him was, I said, can you tell me why you did it, what happened, and then, we'll set up a plan, just you and me, on what we're going to do about it and help you through this. And this child looks at me and he lies to me on my face after I did all of this. And it just broke my heart into a million pieces. And there was no punitive action. I had not suggested punishment of any kind. I, of course, understand that he would be nervous and guilty, but I had tried my hardest to build trust and confidence. And I remember going home and just crying and saying, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I've spent my whole year trying to build that relationship with this child, and clearly it's not happened. Just a child in my class who sort of fails a test after I've invested a lot of time and lots of different new ways of teaching them. So I just feel like this happens to us all the time as educators. Even today, I work on innovations and they don't get approved or it doesn't work, and you're back to the drawing board. And as I mentioned, it's a profession you have to invest your heart and soul into. You're not here because you're making money, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You're here because you want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's really hard to kind of pick yourself up again when you fail and it doesn't work, and reinvest. And on the
Yeah.
other end of the spectrum, because I'm doing innovation in education, I talk to a lot of people who are sort of very cynical. They're just the constant refrain is, "Well, how is this innovative? This has been done 20 years ago. We've been there, we've done that." And innovation sometimes doesn't lie in coming up with something completely unique, but in just tweaking it, in customizing it, in reimagining it. I mean, even the Internet Free Education Resource Bank I was telling you about before, it's project based learning, which is a very old and tried and tested technique. It's just that we're trying to figure out how to do it for low resource communities.
Yeah.
So I just feel like I don't want to go there, but I also don't want to fall on the other side. And I understand why so many educators actually quit very early and there's such high attrition, because it
Mm-hmm.
is a very emotionally draining profession.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a struggle that we sort of have to deal with as educators. And I feel like it can never be just a job. It has to be a
Mm-hmm.
calling. Because if it is not a calling, then at best it'll be effective, but it'll never be transformative. So, it's a journey for me. I'm still trying to balance my emotional investment, recognizing that I can't afford to be spent because there's so many other kids who I want to work with and I would
Mm-hmm.
like to champion. But at the same time, just, it's important to preserve yourself, I think. And maybe, one thing to do is to celebrate those small and big successes and
Yeah.
just almost build up like a bank or a reservoir of emotional strength. So you can pull on it
Yeah.
when you're on those low times. So I actually write some of the stories and testimonials from the children that I hear on focus group discussions and keep it on a sticky note in my computer so that when I face sort of brutal rejection in terms of something being cancelled or not working, I go back and read that and I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah.
The world is
This is
okay.
what I'm doing it for. I have these quotes here. Here's who you're focused on. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, my hats off to you, and also talk about resilient, and every time getting back at it again, regardless of the disappointment. And my question was going to be, but you already answered it. It's like what keeps you going, right? So what keeps you going is the understanding that you do make changes. Yeah, they're not
Yeah.
always visible, but they are most definitely there, and there is an impact. And every day there is, and I recognize it as well from the very beginning of beginning of Teach Pitch in the very early days, that every single day we had teachers signing up to the platform, right?
Mm.
But on other levels, things weren't going as I imagined they would go. There were no funders, or certain business models didn't work out, or there was a hurdle here or a hurdle there and stuff like that. But every single day I saw new people signing up. So I say I must
Yeah.
be doing something right, right?
Yeah.
'Cause these
Yeah.
people otherwise wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Why else would they show up, right? So
Yeah.
that gave me strength. Just that's
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
only little kind of micro dose that you need to kind of keep you
Exactly.
going. So yeah, so
Yeah.
you need something like that. Yeah.
But exactly that, right? Although we have to remember why we're here, and it's easy to get distracted in things like funding or recognition or
Yeah.
publications or so on. But at the end of the day, if the children, the teachers, the parents, they're telling us we're doing it right and they're benefiting,
Yeah.
that's all we should really be focused on,
Yeah.
and know that then everyone else will, the system will follow,
Yeah.
but just to keep that always
Yeah.
top of mind.
Yeah. I have one question related before we go to your second challenge, with regards to hurdles that you might have encountered when it comes to policy. Because you previously mentioned you work with non-governmental organizations, and maybe people who are more on the policy side. Has there ever been kind of a tremendous disappointment on that level, or more the opposite? Are they already happy you come with so many resources and ideas, and is that already helpful for them?
So many, so
No.
many. I think the problem, and I think this actually leads to my second challenge, was people have just gotten used to seeing education in one way or another, and then it's just really hard to shift that, because then there's also policies created on that. So, for example, Prior to COVID, digital education was not recognized in so many countries. So we're also working on a different program which focuses on out of school adolescent children. And what we figured is because most of them are in jobs or have responsibilities at home, families, and a lot of them have compounded learning loss, they couldn't go back to school. So we said, let's create a different model for them to learn sort of anytime, any place. So it's a sort of a personalized hybrid learning model which uses technology. And so many places we went to, they were like, we don't believe in technology based education. And then, of
Mm,
course, COVID just changed that completely because
mm,
suddenly now technology is the only way we want to learn. So now, when I talk to people about internet free learning, they're sort of like, no, 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 give us technology.
yeah.
So it's actually just it's sad because I feel like as part of the larger education system, we often try and encourage and push global best practices, but what ends up happening is a lot of policy in governments becomes very fixed then. And
Mm,
even though that's not the intention, it then does not allow or permit any kind of innovation. And so that's happened many times when people have told
yeah.
us, well, that's great, but I think also the proof is in the pudding, right? So if you do small pilots, which is what we've been doing in different parts of the world with what we call early adopters, so people who've been coming to us and saying, let's do this, gradually people are sitting up and taking notice. So now we have so many different government bodies who have approached us, both for the Internet Free Education Resource Bank and for the Digital School Program. But it's
Mm,
happened because they've seen it work and they've seen and heard from NGOs on what the impact and results have been. So I
mm,
think policy is never a leading indicator, it's always lagging. So as
yeah.
long as we're okay with that, now I've sort of set myself up to believe that in the initial days, we're always going to get a no. And that's okay because they heard us. And then, gradually it's our job to almost convince them to
Yeah.
change their mind and to
Yeah.
convince them by showing them because they don't want to take the risk. And it's, fair enough for them.
Yeah.
And so that becomes part of my role.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I would say here is that when I speak to policymakers, they want to be convinced by what will enjoy uptake among their constituents. So among the people that they're trying to help. And what we now see, and this is also kind of amplified by the pandemic, is like loads of people have made use of our resources and of our technology because of the pandemic. So now the numbers automatically speak for us, right? It's
Yeah.
not just me pitching
Yeah.
kind of, oh, this will be great, and this will be great,
Yeah.
because you're continuously, it feels like you're continuously selling something, and then people say,
Yeah.
no, 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 I don't want to buy, I don't want to buy, I don't want to buy. But now actually it's not a sales process because you just have such convincing numbers. So it's like, no,
Yeah.
listen, tens of thousands of people in your country,
Yeah.
teachers are already using it, right? So it's hard to go against those numbers. That's a change that I've seen, and but I'm sure it'll change again, or it'll shift again, or kind of where the focus is, and it's also, I think it has to do with how government and policymakers, how they focus on certain things, because that is also steered
Yeah.
top down, and then someone gets the assignment to do this and this only, so they can only focus on that, and anything that falls outside of that sadly cannot be considered, whereas it's not
Yeah.
that static, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that brings us actually to your second challenge, because you say do what you believe in. We've tried hard to standardize education in order to improve quality. People are scared of being creative in education because it feels as though we are experimenting with our children, or everything of any value has been tried, and now the prevailing model is best. How does one develop innovation in this environment? Yeah, so we've already established that we're not talking to a community of creatives or risk takers. We are proudly supported by Tony's, who have created a product that I absolutely love called Tonybox. It's an audible tool that allows the discovery of our world's most beautiful stories for children of all ages. We are the proud owner of a Tonybox, and our 3-year-old daughter listens to the Tony stories religiously, whether this is the Gruffalo, Cookie Monster, or her all-time favorite Elsa from Frozen. loads of figurines that fit on the box, and loads who are dying to tell you their story. Now, what I particularly love about the Tony box is that there is no screen involved. So you can basically use the box at any moment of the day, just before bedtime or as we do during bath time. Now, Tony's is also making tremendous strides improving their product for teachers from all over the world so they can grow their lessons. And if you want to know more about what Tony's is doing, you can go to us.tonys.com/pages/Tonys-for-teachers. That is /pages/Tonys-for-teachers, where you can find lots more information about all the beautiful new products they are creating. From the classroom starter set to the school expansion pack to the 6-pack school bundle. Loads of fun and lots to learn with Tony's. So yeah, just kind of extending on this thread of thinking, how do you
Yeah.
establish innovation?
It's really difficult, and at the same time it's really easy, because
Mm,
the problem is that what we've done is we have minimum standards and global best practices for everything, right? From what we teach to how we teach. And the idea and the intention is good. It's to create sort of quality, right? So even if you think about the minimum standards of education in emergencies, what it really is a gold standard of education, irrespective of emergencies, because
yeah.
it talks about things like inclusiveness, responsiveness, community engagement, and that's sort of the best principles of education anywhere. It's not about emergencies, and it's really hard to do all of that in emergencies. Even if you think about our monitoring and evaluation frameworks, we try and think about contribution and attribution. We think about randomized control trials, but I mean, Anu, let me ask you this. Have you ever been able to isolate the impact of a particular kind of learning? I mean, are you really telling me that a child has learned something only because of what they did in classrooms? So you're telling me
Yeah.
that the conversation that they had in the corridor, or what they thought of when they walked home, or the interaction with the parent had nothing to do with it, and it was just
Mm,
that one thing. You can never do it. So
mm,
I think the real struggle is sometimes we're not accepting the realities on the ground, because
mm,
those differences scare us. It
mm,
forces us out of this model of standardization. And
mm,
then, it also makes us feel like maybe we're disadvantaging those communities by not offering them the best. But
mm,
the best may be different. There's not one universal best. There are
mm.
different versions of that for different communities.
Yeah.
And it's very relative. So, for
Yeah.
example, some learning is just not relevant for some learners.
Yeah.
Think about calculus or world history that we're teaching remote tribal communities. But
Mm,
then the response we get is, but what if that person wants to be the world's best mathematician? How can you
mm,
disadvantage them by not teaching them calculus? And you really wonder, I was like, but how can you disadvantage them by not teaching them about their ecosystem that they live in either?
mm.
Right? So I think it's really hard sometimes as innovators, because there's so many different hurdles we have to cross. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're trying to solve hard problems. In
Yeah.
addition to that, there's this layer of like standards and expectations and quality, which is good because it makes us work harder. But it often just inhibits us and prevents us from truly coming up with new
Yeah.
innovations.
Yeah.
So I think the to me, what I always try and tell myself is that we need to acknowledge that education is as much an art as it is a science.
Mhm.
It depends as much on the mood of the child as it does on the pedagogical approach. It
Mm,
depends as much on the trust between the teacher and the student as it does on the quality of the resources.
mm,
So it is not easy for us to ignore one side for the other. So there is
mm,
a huge part of what we do as innovators, which relies on evidence based learning, which relies on ensuring that there's high quality best practices embedded within what we're doing. But at the same time, there also has to be as much of just instinct, and there has to be as much of heart put into it. And what I mean by that is when we go on the field and we see the kids and we see their interactions, it often sparks in us an idea which is sometimes different from what the best practices suggest. But it is something that would work in that context, and we just have to trust ourselves to do that. So we get inspired by global trends, but perhaps not limited by them, right?
Mhm.
So we're following our instincts as an educator versus waiting for something perfect, because I don't think that something perfect is coming anytime soon. If it
Mhm.
were to, we would have come a long time ago. And I mean, like I mentioned earlier, with the digital and non-digital learning, there, it's almost become like a trend that, oh, now people have to learn using digital. So it's really funny because some of the most affluent homes in the world, we are setting limits on screen time. We only want our kids to do hands-on learning. And in some of the most deprived contexts, they only want to do digital, because they think that that's how the rich kids are learning and that's how they should learn. So it's just sad that we've created these norms and these standards, which then inhibit us from doing what we really need to do for our kids.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're also doing this to our teachers, right? We're not letting them follow their instinct.
Yeah.
And I understand that sometimes teachers are not prepared or qualified enough to, but just eliminating that entirely and saying that teachers should never follow their instinct and should always just follow a script, I can promise you that there's no transformative education
Yeah.
happening that way. It's not possible. That means we're just assuming this child at a particular level will learn in a particular way no matter what's happening. How is that possible?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we live in such a metrics based society. So, every single site that I go to, just this morning, I was doing some research looking at a site, an innovation site in a specific country. And the first thing that is shared with you is the metrics, the success metrics of what this organization has accomplished. We do the same on our homepage. We say how many users, how many people benefit, and whatever, because we are
Yeah,
kind of addicted to kind of measuring everything and giving you the stats and whatever. Now,
yeah,
sadly, the process of teaching and learning cannot all be defined in just a statistic,
yeah,
right? Also,
exactly.
what metrics does, and what I think, and I agree with you, is a dangerous process. It kind of makes the assumption that there's a one size fits all approach to this,
Yeah,
whereas
yeah,
there isn't. Right? I've
yeah,
I've you know I've spoken to a professor from Stavanger, Professor Ann Mangen. She is a professor in reading, and she persuaded me also to become an advocate of the traditional book. Yeah, we were just talking about digital learning. She says this book
yeah,
is an invention in and of itself that is
yeah,
thousands and thousands of years old. Let's not just dismiss it for a Kindle or a smartphone or whatever, because it is well crafted and well thought of. It's also the muscular engagement that we have with a book, the fact that it is on paper, that it is no screen, that allows us to absorb the information that is in a book a lot better than we do
yeah,
when we watch something digital. Yes, digital is good for getting information from A to B quicker, but it is not good to. And she's done kind of objective scientific research on that level, where she worked with 10th graders
yeah,
the same text, one on a digital device and the other one kind of paper based. And the 10th graders who were absorbing the text paper based, the results were far, much further, far better than the ones that had to do it on a
that's
device.
amazing.
Right? Same
Yeah,
intellectual level, same everything,
yeah,
same everything. So there's no one size fits all here. Yes,
no,
there are advantages to digital, but no, not everything should be digital, right? So
yeah,
so you
yeah,
cannot. And I think that's the counter question that I have here, why I'm getting all fired up about statistics and metrics, is also like, if we wouldn't measure, then we would
yeah,
we would be none the wiser. So
yeah,
to a certain extent we have to,
yeah,
because we need to
yeah,
kind of have some indication of progress, right? Because
yeah,
otherwise, what are we doing? Because
absolutely.
yeah, so
And
it's a
and that's
double-edged
why
sword, I would say.
and that's
Yeah.
how what I was saying earlier is, I mean, I think all of these processes which are brought into education are fantastic because they're really pushing us to do better every day, right? Because we see the metrics, we see the statistics, we are able to gauge how much we're able to do. But it at the same time has become very limiting, and that is what we need to avoid.
Yeah.
We need to avoid falling into a trap of, because it isn't a chemistry formula. And
Yeah.
if it is, then there's a huge amount of just like an uncertain element which is thrown into that formula, which
Yeah.
readers don't know. So you can
Yeah.
get the titration of every other element in that equation right, but still get it wrong because
Yeah.
that X factor was not accounted for. And so, what I mean to say is just that we need to be aware of that. And as educators, not get daunted by that. Because I think
Yeah.
in innovation, that's very common. I mean, the number of times I've heard, but how is that really innovative? Because someone's done it before. Or how would that really work? Are you really willing to risk a child's future? And the reality is, of course, I'm not. Of course, I would never do that. How can I, in clear and good conscience, do that? The reality is, we're not risking a child's future as long as I know that I'm not doing harm. So I would not do a program which I was not sure about. So, for example, if it was a trauma informed program, I would make
Right.
sure that that would be tested before we could go to the field. But if it is a program that I'm comfortable will at worst do nothing and at best have great impact, why would I not try it? And why would I not try a different way of doing things? And just rest assured that, like I said, there's as much, education is as much a science as it is an art.
Yeah.
And there's as much magic in it as there is, scientific formulations. So
Yeah.
we have to, I think, as educators, be comfortable to trust our instinct and our gut
Yeah.
on what kids really need and then say, we'll design for that. And even if it isn't what people are talking about or recognize, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
fine. We can still go ahead with it. So it comes from a space of having to build a lot of self confidence
Yeah.
and self belief, because I think it's hard in this space and people tear you down a lot. So if you really do want to try and do something different, it is very possible that people will challenge that
Yeah.
for the first maybe 10, 12, 15, 20
Yeah.
times. But
Yeah.
I think it's hard to keep persisting. So it's been a journey on that for me to
Yeah.
build that self confidence.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's not one coming over the other, it's just them both going hand in hand, but
Yeah.
not letting one element override the other one.
Yeah. 100%. I think we can talk for hours about this particularly, but it's good that you're looking so closely at the process, and that you are in a in a position of being a change maker with that understanding. I think that's very comforting for me, at least, to know that you don't have a one size fits all approach, and I like what you say. Education is magic, and it deserves to be treated as such, right? So from every step of the way.
Aldo, just to mention, I'm also fortunate to be in an organization which has allowed that. So the
Yes.
organization has actually permitted me to
Yeah.
try new things and
Yeah.
test them out and see how it works. And they've trusted my instinct on it.
Yeah.
Like my boss, when I went to him with the Internet Free Education Resource Bank, said, okay, what do you need from me? And I said, I want 3 months and I want you to let me be for 3 months and just see how this goes. And he was like, sure, go do it and
Yeah.
come back to me if you need anything. And I'm
Nice.
so grateful for that. So I think that's a huge part of what builds my confidence.
Yeah. Nice. No, and that's good. And that's your last challenge, because you speak about your personal ambition, and kind of that got you where you are, because obviously you worked very hard to get there, and also to get that level of freedom, because people trust you, and for good reasons. But it comes, as you describe yourself, slightly with a price, and basically, as your third challenge, you say being kind to yourself. You were raised with a lot of ambition, you indicate, in a family that had very high expectations of you, and you're working on your dream job. But how do you balance that with being a working mother? Equality isn't possible, and let's not glorify burnout. Let's aim towards more equity and being kind to ourselves by managing our ambitions. Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. And we had a kind of a call just before we started this interview, and you explained this, and I thought it was so well versed. And I think what you're addressing here, I think this is an issue that a lot of people especially mothers, are coping with across the board in many other industries. Can you explain it a little bit further?
Yeah, so Aldo, this is really sort of obviously very personal as you identified, and this is my homage to all working mothers. I just sort of feel like it's a joy to have children, it really is. And I'm extremely fortunate that I grew up in a family. My parents, my brother, my husband, they all have very high ambitions and dreams for me. And genuinely, if every girl in the world had a family like mine, I don't think we'd be fighting misogyny anymore. Uh, but that sort of came with it comes with its own shackles because it sort of imbibed me with this fire and this ambition to do something and to achieve something. And I'm extremely aware that my 6-year-old daughter googles me, or she tells me that she believes in education as an equalizer, and that warms my heart. But my 4-year-old is upset if I can't pick her up from school, or if I'm not mentally present or I'm tired when there's a birthday party. Because the reality is that we keep expecting equality in life, and it's not possible because men and women are fundamentally different. And this is to your point of one size fits all. It doesn't. Women have been entrusted with a really important task of continuity and raising the human race.
Mm,
So while we don't want absent mothers, we don't want children who are raised without that support. And each of us go back to our own childhood and remember how important a role that our parents played was. But at the same time, we have our own ambitions to contend with because we're being raised with ambition and excitement to do something. So while it's a real joy to be a mother or a daughter, a sister, a wife, perhaps we start thinking about equity. Men and women are not the same. We should stop treating them the same. And we treat them exactly the same in the workplace. And that's very difficult.
mm,
I really hope that we continue to break those glass ceilings. People continue to have a high expectations of us because if they don't, frankly, we would not be able to conquer the different things that we are able to. But we just try and make that playing field more equitable. And I think we've almost gotten to a stage where we just glorify burnout and being busy. I don't know a single person who you reach out to, who you call and wouldn't respond saying, "Yeah, of course, it's been a very busy time," or "I have been very busy." And you can do this experiment, call 5 people and check. I promise you, they would say that.
all my friends say like, I'm busy, can we talk later, or
Yeah,
something like this. It's like,
yeah,
there's no room for spontaneity anymore, for
no,
because
yeah,
everyone just has fully packed agendas, right? And
yeah.
if it's not work, it's the kids, or it's something else ongoing. So you need to plan a social, right? You can't just follow,
Yeah,
spontaneity.
and I think that it's almost become it's become a done thing, right? So if you ask anybody how are you, they'll say, "Well, I'm okay." If you ask anybody how has it been, they'll say we've been really busy. And we've just become these people who glorify burnout. And especially if you see even the memes or the comics on working mothers, it's always people who are just, forget even working mothers, any mother is just overburdened, this hero, this champion, this person who's like lifting 100 burdens, juggling 100 things. And now that's become the norm. That's become what we identify mothers as. And I recognize that that's something we're doing to actually give recognition to the amount of burden that this woman is carrying. But it's almost become an expectation. And the reality is also a lot of our jobs are not rewarding in the very obvious sense of the word. They're messy. As we talked about, for you, success was teacher signing up every day or perhaps talking to you and telling you what it was like. For me, it was seeing a child learning on the ground or getting an idea or taking that forward. It's not so simple, the pathway, right? So I don't know, I just really wonder whether until equity becomes a norm and we start treating us differently based on our needs, we can just be kinder to ourselves and perhaps not be a super mom. It's okay to maybe not be one, I hope, some days. And it's okay to maybe not be a super employee some days. So
Yeah,
I just really wonder whether as a society we can just reduce our expectations of ourselves
yeah,
and become kinder.
yeah. I just wanted to go back to one thing, just to clarify, because you said in the workplace we're treated equal and we're not. I think there are people, women who would argue on that one with you, because they see still loads of inequalities, and they
Yeah.
actually have the frustration that they are not being treated equal. If you think about pay, for instance, right? That's
Yes.
that's
Yes.
but also, for
Yes.
instance, in sports. So we had an interview with a
Yes.
with a
Yes.
top female golf player, and
Yes.
to my
Yes.
surprise, I discovered that the female golf profession is funded only a quarter of the male golf professions, like
Yeah.
for absolutely no reasons, just because the
Yeah.
sponsors are less interested, therefore media is less interested, etc., etc.,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
So what would you say to those people? Because those
Yeah.
people are actually kind of on the forefront of no more equality, because our work should also be appreciated.
Yeah. So, what I was trying to say is we are striving towards equality at best. I think we should be striving towards equity and not
Yeah.
equality. This is
Mm.
almost the same as the analogy that we have for our children. We say
Yeah.
everyone should be striving for this particular standard of learning. Actually, that's not
Yeah.
true. Every
Yeah.
person is different, so they cannot be striving for that same level of learning. Let's try
Yeah.
and create different standards. Let's
Yeah.
try and ensure that they are striving to the best of their ability, their potential, and
Mm.
recognize that one person's potential may not be the same as another person's capability or ambition. So,
Yeah.
what I wanted to say is, I think if it's possible, we don't strive just for equality, but we strive for something different, which is
Yeah.
equity.
Yeah.
Because it's not possible to treat us as equal. It's just not. We're not equal.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and I hear you, especially when you say we glorify burnout. We just work so hard, and we take pride in it. And actually, what does it give us at the end of the day, right? Other than being overtired, and children being upset, bosses not being happy, and kind of we at some points, you're right, we need to be kinder to ourselves and kind of see, okay, if you have young children, then that's not the time to kind of work the hardest in your lifetime. That just doesn't necessarily match, because it undoubtedly, one thing would go at the expense of the other. And but for some reason, we need to move towards a society that is accepting of that, right? That we need to
Yeah.
needs to show more understanding for that. I mean, one of the things that you see is, for instance, maternity leave in the United States, right? And I know that Duchess of Sussex, right? So Meghan is trying to make a difference there for in the United States, which is the biggest economy, world economy that we have. They don't know maternity leave. They have like
Yeah.
what is it, 2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
supposed to leave a 2 week old baby behind and just go to work like nothing happened? It's like, that's ludicrous. And
Yeah. And
what is being facilitated there, and
in,
but yeah.
and I want to just for a second bring this back to our profession, right, in education. I mean, I think I'm sure you've seen the impact that COVID had on educators and mothers, and it's been horrific to see. I
Yeah.
mean, the number of educators I have spoken to who are women who've been trying to teach their children at home while teach online, while sort of support an entire class, have just not been able to sustain in the profession. The number
Yeah.
of people who've actually quit the profession is been just, it's a devastating loss to the profession.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think if we don't change this, we're going to have a problem. A majority of our teachers
Yeah.
around the world are women. And if we
Yeah.
don't recognize that when they go into the classroom after leaving a little baby at home, they're not going to be there 100%. And the impact of that is going to come out on our children. And we don't
Yeah.
recognize that and treat that with a bit more humanity, we are doing ourselves a disservice. So I
Yeah,
just feel like
definitely.
there's just, as a working mother, I feel like there's a lot for us as working women to try and achieve. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we just have to, as a profession, recognize that a majority of people who work here are of the female gender and may have different needs. And so, if we're not
Yeah.
building a more equitable world,
Yeah.
we can be rest assured that education is not going to reach its potential.
Yeah. Let's strive to equity, not equality. I love that. I very much like that. Thank you so much, Janhvi, for that one. We're almost at the end of this interview, but before we close off, I would like to ask our traditional two last questions that I ask each guest. And the first one is around reading. So, if you look back at your career and kind of what got you where you are today, has there been any book that has helped you or inspired you on that path? And if so, you know, could you mention it, and what about it would you recommend to our listeners?
I was trying to think of a very sophisticated book, but I couldn't. I'll tell you the book that brought me a lot of joy and relatability, and that is Little Women. It was my favorite book growing up. I could open any chapter of the book and start again. And one of the biggest reasons for that was I just felt like those four girls, in some way, at some part, were like me. I think what that's meant for me in education was to always think about relatability, and to always try and just think about connections and how important that was. And for also, on the flip side, the books that I've always really enjoyed are also those which are fictional. And I feel like if you teach through imagination, and you want to help unlock that, it can open worlds which are new. So I feel like that has always been my favorite book, so I'm just going to suggest that. There have of course been a lot of educational books which have been fantastic, especially Eleanor Duckworth, who is a professor of mine, who's written some beautiful books about how you teach without teaching, and ensure that learning is happening through sort of self-guided instruction. And those have also really opened up my eyes, specifically a book called Tell Me Why. And I would also recommend that quite strongly.
Little Women and Tell Me Why by Eleanor Duckworth. Um, um, Thank you so much. These are beautiful, beautiful recommendations. And then my very last question. Now let's turn the tables. This is the Janhvi-Kanoria podcast, or the Education Above All podcast. Who would be your first guest?
Wow, that's a big question. It's actually been my dream to have Heine Shekhamuza come and for me to be able to interview her, because I feel like a lot of the visionaries when it comes to education, they create prizes, they create awards, but they don't win them themselves. And I really wish that sometimes they did. So I would love to have people who have actually created these awards, created this recognition for the field of education, come on, and for us to hear from them what it's like and what their challenges have been working in this space. Because my sense is it would be a journey that we would all also really relate to in their own ways. So I know a lot of people have started beginning to talk and share those journeys, and I'm very appreciative for the work that you guys are doing, helping people share their personal journeys. But I would love to have her.
Definitely. Well, let's set it up. You can leave our do the interview with Sheikh Moza, and I wholeheartedly agree with your recommendation, because the kind of what she has started to keep the conversation going, and to make sure that those who are most deprived of a quality education are not forgotten. I think that's a significant role and should not be underestimated. And everywhere you go, because I know that if you fly to Qatar, and with Qatar Airways, education above all is kind of the organization that each passenger can contribute to. So I know it's very ingrained in Qatar, education above all, and loads of people that you talk about. So it's not just an organization. It really truly cares, and you feel that and you see that, not in the least because such great people like yourself are working there. But I've spoken to many other people from education above all, previously, and every single person that I speak to is doing great and inspiring work and wants to make that difference. And if Sheikh Moza, who has started this, she should be commended for doing that. I wholeheartedly agree, and I hope you will be able to get that interview. Um, uh, Janhvi-Kanoria, thank you so much for your time. We wish you all the best on your further path with education above all. If you want to know more about the work that Janhvi is doing, go to our show notes, go to the URL of the link of Education Above All. There's loads of information. There are loads of things you can see. Follow them on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever more. The organization is continuously engaging, and so I couldn't recommend it more for you to get involved. Janhvi-Kanoria, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you so much, Aldo. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles, project coordination by Inva Saini, and production assistance by Genta Metalia.